evening, everybody. For all of you joining from across the world for this virtual NASSCOM Product Conclave 2021. I sincerely hope all of you are doing well and all your families are doing well too. Like Justin said, my name is Sindhu Gangadharan, Senior Vice President and Managing Director of SAP Labs here in India. And I have to say, I think we've had a great day one so far, and I'm sure this session is going to be super exciting for all of you. Now, over the past 10 months or so, if you just ask me, product leaders across the world, around the world, have been facing so many situations that they've really never encountered before. And we're all in a marketplace that's changing so fast and like we've never experienced before. Now, when seeking a North Star during times of uncertainty, the question really is how product leaders are going to identify themselves and how are they going to create those winning teams in order to drive customer excellence. So in this regard, it's my absolute pleasure to invite the speaker for this session. He is going to be an absolute product rock star, and you're going to hear that from him directly. He founded the Silicon Valley Product Group back in 2003, and that time it was to pursue his interest in helping others create successful products through his writing, his speaking, his advising, as well as coaching. And previously, he also served as an executive responsible for defining and building products for some of the world's most successful companies, including HP Labs, Netscape Communications, as well as eBay. He's the author of the book Inspired: How to Create Tech Products Customers Love, and also the upcoming book, which you all have to get your hands on, Empowered: Ordinary People, Extraordinary Products. So he's also an invited speaker at conferences and companies worldwide, and he's a graduate of the University of California at Santa Cruz and of the Stanford University Executive Institute. It's my absolute pleasure today to invite Marty Cagan, partner at Silicon Valley Product Group. Welcome, Marty, to the NASSCOM Product Conclave 2021. I'm eagerly looking forward, along with all of us on the call today, to our conversation. But first and foremost, I'd like to hear your thoughts, Marty, on this extremely crucial topic of the importance of product leadership. Over to you, Marty.
All right. Thank you very much, Sindhu. I hope I'm looking forward to talking to the group here. And of course, I'm sorry we can't do this in person, which is always better, but there are some advantages to doing this virtually, and certainly we've been taking advantage of that, so we want to. I am going to just share my screen here, hopefully, and you'll be able to see a presentation. Okay, I think you're good, hopefully. So yes, I would like to talk about product leadership. To me, this is the reason this is such an important topic. Many of you have probably heard of Inspired, the book Sindhu just referenced. That's been out for a few years. But Inspired speaks to product teams. It's really all about how product managers, designers, engineers work together to solve hard problems. And in truth, that's my favorite topic. I love working with teams on these kinds of problems. That's really where innovative products come from. But one of the things I learned when that book started spreading beyond Silicon Valley into really all corners of the world, I learned that in many companies, the teams are not actually allowed to work that way. They're not allowed to work the way good teams work, which of course was extremely counterintuitive to me. Why in the world would that be if the way I was describing is the way the top most valuable companies in the world work? And what I learned was that just like we shared the best practices for how product teams work, we really needed to share the best practices for how leaders work. And that is, so about 2 years ago, I started on Empowered. Empowered is out now. And, you know, it's for leaders. Like I said, it is for leaders. When I say leaders and product leaders, I mean the managers and leaders of product management, product design, and engineering. That's really who this is for. And in this talk, I wanted to give you a sense of what these product leaders are really responsible for in a good company. Now, of course, my hope would be that all of you work in such a good company and you recognize this. But if you're like many organizations all over the world, many people all over the world, unfortunately, you probably odds are you don't work in a company like that. And I would love to see you change. And changing starts with really understanding what the difference really is. So you heard enough about my background, I think, that so we can kind of skip that. The one thing I'd probably emphasize, just because it's fair for you to understand where all my, or at least a lot of my biases come from, and that is I started as an engineer, which I'm sure a lot of you started as engineers too. That is not an unusual path, but there are many paths. But it is true that I think when you come from the engineering perspective, you bring certain biases, just like if you come from the design perspective or from the business perspective. Good product leaders need to learn all three of those perspectives anyway, but it's normal that they would be impacted by their experiences. So, What I wanted to start by talking about was this idea of empowered product teams, because leadership's job is to really help your organization have those kinds of teams. So we need to really talk about what that means. And hopefully this will make clear, if you don't have this yet, this is really what it's about changing. All right. To be clear, empowered product teams exist to serve our customers in ways that meet the needs of the business. Now, that might sound obvious, but most product teams out there, that's not the case. In most product teams out there, they don't exist to serve our customers. They exist to serve our stakeholders. They are literally there to serve the business. That is how their assignment is phrased. You'll often hear the business, and that what they're referring to is this is the source of the things they need to build. So right at the beginning, the fundamental purpose of the teams between a feature team, which is how I typically refer to these, and empowered product teams starts right at the purpose. But then if you drill in a little bit and go a little deeper, you see that there are even more, deeper insidious issues. Product teams are given customer or business problems to solve. Sometimes they're both. It's a problem for the customer and your business, but they are given problems to solve. Things like our churn rate is too high, or it takes too long for our customers to onboard, or people don't like our service, or we are not at product market fit. Those are typical problems to solve. Now, the difference is an empowered team is then able to figure out a solution to that problem, the best solution they see fit. Now, let's contrast that with a feature team. In a feature team, they're not given problems to solve. They're given a roadmap of projects and features to build. When they're given that roadmap of features, those are not problems to solve that have outcomes. Those are outputs. Those are deliver this feature on this date. In that model, the team is not empowered at all. They are, they're assigned work. They have to design a feature, maybe do a little usability testing, but it's mostly about put it on the backlog and build it, QA test it, deploy it. As opposed to in an empowered product team, they need to discover a solution worth building. So that's where the concept of product discovery comes from. It only makes sense in an empowered product team. It's not discovery if you're given a roadmap of features to build because somebody has decided that's the feature they want. we don't know if that feature is going to actually solve the problem. Some teams don't even know what the underlying motivation or problem was behind that. But all they know is they were told to integrate PayPal as a payment method by the end of the month. That's output. So it's still hard to be a feature team. You still have to get the designer to do their work. You have to get the engineers to do their work. You need to make sure. But the truth is the product management job on a feature team is not even really product management. It's project management. Now, on a product team, on the other hand, a real empowered product team, the product manager has a very explicit role. Just like the designer is explicitly responsible for designing the usable solution, and the engineers are explicitly responsible for building a scalable, performant, fault-tolerant, maintainable product, the product manager is responsible for making sure that the product that gets built is both valuable to the customer and viable for your business. So value and viability are really what the product manager is on the hook for. And that is fundamentally different than on a feature team where value and viability are not on the product manager. They're really on whoever executive decided that feature needed to be built. And then the final real point of distinction for an empowered product team versus a feature team is that if you're a feature team and you're told to build that feature on a roadmap, if that feature doesn't actually move the needle, solve the underlying problem, whose fault is that? You can't really blame the product team, the feature team in this case, because they didn't decide that was the right feature anyway. On the other hand, with an empowered product team, they were the ones that came up with that solution. So now we can hold them accountable for the results. And that's why we talk about true empowered product teams are accountable to outcomes as opposed to feature teams that are accountable to outputs. So you can hopefully see an empowered product team versus a feature team is a dramatically different thing. Now, just for completeness, it is fair. There's a third kind of team out there that I wish I could say was rare, but it's not. Now, it isn't common at all in the product world, but in the general IT world. And of course, there's a big difference between IT and product. IT is very much a service organization versus product is, again, to serve customers. But in the IT world, some of you may have heard of processes like SAFe. Stands for Scaled Agile Framework, which is kind of ridiculous because it's not agile at all. But there are processes and those are not even feature teams or product teams. Those are just delivery teams. They don't even pretend to care about innovation. I literally can't point to product companies that use that. But it is true that if, a lot of big banks and insurance companies, they do because they're attracted to the old control they had in the waterfall model. So anyway, that's not what we're talking about. And if any of you are unfortunate enough to work in a company that's using a process like that, all I can say is that none of this talk is going to be relevant to you. The book I just came out with is not going to be relevant to you. The last book is not relevant to you. I just could wish you luck and encourage you to maybe find a company where you can practice your craft. All right. So in empowered organizations, and this is a surprise to a lot of people, in empowered organizations, we don't need less leadership. We need better leadership. A lot of people think that's even the case with Agile, that we need less management, but it's really not true, especially at scale. We need better leadership. And that's what this talk is about, is what does it mean to have the better leadership we need? Many of you probably have heard of Andy Grove. He was a legend. He was considered one of the best CEOs in our industry's history. He passed away a couple years ago, but he's actually the guy that invented OKRs. He took the predecessor system, which was called Management by Objectives, and he evolved it into the OKR system. Now, the OKR system, by the way, Okay, he invented that system as a way to assign work to the teams he had, which were empowered teams. His whole company was built around the empowered team model, as was Google, as was Facebook, as was Amazon. And so this is one of the clues. OKRs is designed for that model. When you try to apply OKRs to a company that's using feature teams, it's a complete waste of time. And that's why you hear so many companies saying, we tried for 4 quarters to do OKRs and it was a big waste of time, just theater, nothing. And it's because feature teams are all about output. OKRs are all about outcomes. That's a mismatch. So anyway, but he was the guy. And anyway, this quote, I think, is gets to the heart of it. What gets in the way of good work? There's really 2 things. People that don't know how to do good work, and people that do know how, but they don't really care to. They're not motivated. And that's a pretty straightforward way to break down the roles of management and leadership. Now, I'm going to talk about those 2 elements, management versus leadership. It is true that most leaders are responsible for both managing and leadership. Now, what usually is different is if you're a first level manager, like you literally manage engineers or you manage product managers, then about 80% of your job is managing and about 20% of your job is leadership, as I'll define both of them. On the other hand, if you get promoted through the organization and let's say you're chief product officer or chief technology officer, then your job is about 80% leadership and about 20% management. So the mix changes as you move through an organization, but most leaders are responsible for both. I wanted to start by talking about management because that's actually the most important responsibility is management. And we're talking here about, in particular, coaching and staffing. Bill Campbell, some of you may know, he was known as the coach of Silicon Valley. He literally coached Steve Jobs and he coached Jeff Bezos. He coached Larry and Sergey for the first 10 years at Google. This guy was amazing behind the scenes coach. I wasn't lucky enough to get coached by him myself, but he did coach 3 of the different managers that I worked for. So I grew up in my career hearing his advice on what it means to be a good leader in a product company. But I love this quote. It's really true. Coaching is no longer a specialty. You cannot be a good manager without being a good coach. And I would argue that this philosophy, you'll see more of his philosophy as we go, but this philosophy is true across all the best product companies, even if they have very different cultures. Like Netflix has a very different culture than Amazon, which has a very different culture than Apple, and which has a very different culture than Google. Sorry. That's the morning wake up from the dogs there, clearly. Okay, hopefully you can still hear me. So coaching is the number one responsibility. It really is. And what I was going to say was those companies have different cultures, but they all believe in the role of coaching. And that's so essential. And it's also so different. You know, I was lucky in my career, like for the first 10 years of my career at HP Labs, I always had a coach every single day, somebody who was worried about helping me get better at my job. Sometimes I had more than one manager responsible for that. But then, of course, I went on to other companies and I learned that that was not always the case. A lot of people have gone their whole career without having anybody that is actually trying to help them get better in their job, which I think is just inexcusable. But this is why I have this number as the first thing. And by the way, in the book, Empowered, it is the single biggest section. There are nearly 100 pages dedicated to becoming a good, competent coach. Christian Idiotti is actually now one of my SVP SVPG partners, but he is a longtime product leader. He's one of the best leaders I have ever seen. And if you talk to anybody who has worked for him, the first thing they will say is he is like the best coach they have ever met. And he's personally taken responsibility for helping them become awesome. I love his quote here: every problem is fundamentally a people problem. And so this is why we need to spend so much time on coaching. All right. Staffing. It's also very major responsibility. Obviously, it's closely tied with coaching. In fact, the better job you do at staffing, the easier it is to coach. But there's a great Bezos quote right there. It's important to realize this. He credits the single most important element of Amazon's success is that they take hiring so seriously. And it's another one of those things, the difference between how a good company recruits and how most companies recruit. In most companies, literally the product leader will just assume that HR is going to do most of the work for hiring. They're going to recruit people. They're going to source people. They're going to go through resumes. And yes, the hiring manager will be on an interview team, but they're more of a spectator in the process. In a good product company, HR may be there to help, maybe, don't count on it. They are really there to, the hiring manager needs to own recruiting. That's what they understand. And by the way, I mean active recruiting. Think like a coach on football. A coach is building a team. That coach goes out and recruits the players that he or she needs. They don't just wait to see who comes and sends an application in. Okay. All right. So those are the main responsibilities when it comes to management, coaching and staffing. The other big responsibility when it comes to leadership is leadership, which is we refer to as strategic context. Netflix refers to as context. It's just, it goes by different names, but this is a very big and important topic. There are many subtopics. When most people say, wow, product leadership is much harder than I thought, this is usually what they're referring to. So, and actually, speaking of Netflix, Leslie Kilgore was one of their original leaders. She's still on their board many years later. And this is really one of the mantras at Netflix. In fact, it's one of the most important mantras, which is lead with context, not control. Now, what they mean by that is there's fundamentally two styles of management in the world, or leadership management, however you want to think of it. The first style, the old style, is called command and control. This is when your executives get together, your stakeholders get together, and they make the decisions and they pass those down the organization. That's called command and control. It's been there since the Industrial Revolution. So it is not a new thing. It's been there forever. And to be honest, in certain kinds of companies, like a manufacturing company, it may be the best thing. I honestly don't know. But if your company depends on innovation, this is deadly. And the best product companies know that. So, like at Netflix, they want to lead by providing teams the context and then empowering those teams in order to figure out the best solutions. They want the teams to own. Netflix is famous. I mean, I'm actually highlighting Netflix because they set the dial way high on pushing decisions down to the teams. Their belief is, first of all, the teams are in a better position to make decisions. They're working with the enabling technology every single day, and they are those teams are talking to customers every single week. So who better to make these decisions? And then they believe those will lead to better decisions. They also feel the same way about process. Process limits teams. So it's not that there's no process. It's just that we don't want much process. We want to focus on providing that context and empowering people. All right. Sorry that the visuals there through the tool are resizing some things there, but strategic context. We're going to go through each one of the items there. Let's talk about product vision first. That's the major area. Product vision is, now to be clear, product vision applies to all our product teams. You do not want one product vision for each product teams. That completely misses the point. In fact, this idea of a good product vision serves as the North Star for the organization. It can't serve as a North Star if every team has its own North Star. You're not going to have that benefit. But vision really does, like this quote says, it animates, it inspires, it motivates, it really gets the team excited about why we're there, what we're going to do over the next several years. Now, of course, the mission of the company is like that one-liner that says, we're here to organize the world's information, but the mission doesn't say how we're going to do that. The product vision does. So the product vision tells the story from the customer's perspective. It's that common thing that no matter what product team you're working in, how your work contributes to the larger whole. It inspires you with the meaningful work. It leverages the industry trends. It reflects our values. It's also true that a good product vision is the single best recruiting tool we have. It also, a product vision, because, by the way, that's what good product people, engineers, designers, product managers, they want to work on a meaningful product vision. And then it drives the architecture and it drives the team topology. I'll talk about team topology in a minute. That's a lot. And a lot of companies don't realize just how necessary a product vision is. Now, it's also fair to point out is if you're a feature team organization where it's your stakeholders that basically everybody is just trying to provide them as many features as they can, then product vision is pretty meaningless. Product discovery is meaningless. So we are only talking here about a product company that is really trying to innovate. All right. Yeah, I've always loved this quote, which really speaks to why product vision is so powerful. This also is another really eloquent way of explaining Netflix lead with context, not control. Control would be assigning tasks so people do their work. Context is telling people why it would be so awesome to have a ship. Okay. All right. The team topology refers to how do you structure your product teams, which is, of course, in every company that's bigger than about 10 engineers, which is most, obviously. This is a really important question. We want the teams to be durable. That means we want them to live a long time. We want them to work on hard problems, but we want them to feel a real sense of ownership. We want them to be largely autonomous. That means that they don't depend on, you can tell a team is not autonomous if they complain to you constantly that every little feature they want to do requires coordination with a dozen other teams. That's an example of not an autonomous team. Now, nobody has perfect autonomy, especially at scale, but we want to maximize for autonomy. We also want to maximize for alignment. Like Netflix likes to say, highly aligned, loosely coupled. To be honest, Netflix is not the only company with that philosophy on team topology. That's the idea. We want to be very aligned, but we want to be as independent as we can. All right. It's important to understand there is no perfect single right team topology, but there are lots of bad topologies. And if your people don't feel empowered, if they don't feel autonomous, if they just feel like a tiny little cog in a giant wheel, that's an example of not a good team topology. All right. Product strategy, to be honest, product strategy is where product leaders earn their money. This is hard, and it's incredibly important. It is often the difference between a successful company and a failed company. Now, I'm talking here about product strategy. There there's many other kinds of strategies: business strategy, go-to-market strategy, discovery strategy. Obviously, you can have a strategy for anything. I'm talking here about product strategy. Product strategy is how do we get the most out of the number of engineers, the number of product teams we have. Because the truth is, I have never been in a company that has as many engineers as they wish they had. They all have way more work to do than they have people to do it. So strategy is how we work to make sure we're getting the most out of what we have. This is also how I see all the time a 30 engineer startup outperforming on every level a large company with 500 engineers. How is that possible? Well, I mean, there's a lot of reasons it's possible for sure when you get into some of those big companies and you see how poorly they're run and organized. But fundamentally, the small company has, not only are they set up well, but they're working smart. And that's a sign of a strong product strategy. Now, in those big companies, it's not that they don't have a good product strategy. Most of them have literally no product strategy. They're only, if you could call it product strategy, is that they tell their teams to support, please as many stakeholders as you can. Go as fast as you can. That is the absence of a product strategy. But product strategy, like I said, is hard. It doesn't come out of if somebody tries to tell you there's a canvas for a good product strategy or a matrix you could fill out or fill in the blanks. They're just not being honest with you. That is not how product strategy works. Product strategy is hard work. Richard Rumelt, by the way, wrote, I think, the best book on the topic called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. But strategy starts with focusing in on the few key things, literally 2-3 key things where if you fix that, you could double your business, not the 100 things that bigger companies chase all at once, which actually has a name. It's called the peanut butter strategy, when you spread yourself so thin that you don't actually make a difference anywhere. But anyway, once you've focused in on some areas, then insights that come from the data, insights that come from the customers, that come from the technology, that comes from the industry. These insights are our levers that we're gonna take advantage of in order to deliver on this strategy. And that turns into action. You have to execute on a strategy, which turns into problems to solve that are given to the product teams, which really is the next topic. You've all probably heard this Steve Jobs quote, but people think focus is saying yes to what you need to do, but it's not. It's really about saying no to the hundreds of other good ideas. So, okay. Now, the way we assign work to teams is with team objectives. And the idea here is you want to empower teams, because in truth, there are 2 ways to assign work. The old command and control way, which is to give a team a roadmap of tasks or features to build, or the empowered way, where you are giving them problems to solve. The quote from Patton, never tell people how to do things. Tell them what to do, and they will surprise you with their ingenuity. That's the idea of team objectives. That, by the way, in a nutshell, is the purpose of OKRs. When OKRs are used properly, which most companies, again, don't, that's what it's for. That's what its purpose was. It was invented to do that, to give teams a problem to solve and make clear what the outcomes are. Avid is actually a longtime product leader. I profiled her and 7 other leaders in the new book. But all these good leaders, a leader should articulate what needs to be done and why, and let the team decide the best way to do it. Yes. So I threw a lot at you there. Now, obviously, it would take me a week, literally, that's not an exaggeration, because this is what I do with product leadership teams at companies. It takes me a week to go through that in any real depth if I wanted to show you how to do this well. But I wanted to give you a high level overview of what these concepts were. And they're not rocket science. These things are not that complicated. I want to make sure they make sense to you intuitively. The product vision describes the future you're trying to create. The team topology is how you structure your teams in order to do that, implement that vision. The product strategy is what helps us decide which problems are the important problems to solve. The team objectives are how we assign those problems to product teams. And then product discovery is how a team discovers a solution that's valuable, usable, feasible, viable. And product delivery is how that team builds that solution and brings it to market. Those are the 6 main concepts in the product world, honestly. Those are the 6 that really matter. And the larger you become as an organization, the more important those are. The first 4 is really the context, the strategic context I described, and delivery and discovery is, of course, what each product team does. So hopefully that makes sense. The one last point, and then we'll talk. We'll get back and talk about some questions that you may have. But I want to be honest with you that product leadership is a hard role. And one of the common problems out there is that many people who want to be a product leader want to please everybody. And don't get me wrong, I'm not advocating the opposite. I would never say your job is not to please people. But let me be realistic. There's no way you're going to please everybody if you're doing your job well. Steve Jobs understood this. He was talking explicitly to leaders here in product organizations. If you want to make everybody happy, don't be a leader. Sell ice cream. That's a much better for making people happy. But it's really true. It's not about that. Now, you are going to have to make choices as a leader, but the best thing to do is to be very open, very transparent, very honest, show people the data, show people the reasons. People will generally go along if they understand and they believe you are coming from a good place and not from a place of your own agenda or politics or anything like that. All right. And then finally, yes, there are the 2 books. And I'm pretty sure Empowered is shipping in India now. It's shipping, I think, all over the world. And if you're interested in going more into depth, that's what the book is for. Yes. It's not an easy read. It's much easier to read Inspired because those techniques are much simpler for people to understand. But topics like product strategy and team topology are really what the leaders are there to do. And so those are harder topics. But I am hoping a lot more leaders learn how to do product leadership well. And I hope that the next generation of leaders, these will be people that know what they're getting into and really provide what their companies need. So with that, maybe we can invite questions. How is this gonna?
Thank you so much, Marty, for that really insightful session. I think there were tons of takeaways for all of us product managers, leaders out there, particularly that statement from Leslie, right? Lead with context, not control. I think that literally applies for every aspect of what we do and how we build products and how we take products to market. So, Marty, what I'd like to do now is spend some time discussing with you on, because, times are changing, right? We've had so many external contexts and changes, and with COVID especially, a lot of the usual kind of contexts and boundary conditions under which we've been operating have changed, and which kind of also changes the dynamics of how we deal with how we bring our products to market and leadership particularly, right? So I'd like to start off by asking you this question. So when external events seem out of control, like we had with COVID, right? It's absolutely important that we have very clear organizational goals. And many times when you have cross-functional teams, and like you said, right, everybody across the organization needs to know where we're marching towards, right? And so during the past year, so many of us, many organizations have had to make very quick pivots, change course, And it's definitely likely that a big chunk of 2021 will also be equally dynamic. So, Marty, I'd like to understand your thoughts when it comes to leveraging cross-functional teams that go across lines of business. How can you make sure that we make those better product decisions?
Okay, well, yeah, that's a big topic for sure. I might help to sort of untangle that because there's really two topics there. One is, like you said, how do good cross-functional teams make good decisions? But the other one is, how do we deal with a world that has so many changes going on right now? So a pandemic has provided, well, it's killed many companies, of course, and it also has absolutely accelerated major transitions, which has helped the disruptors in the industry to move faster. So those are kind of two related but different topics. In the first question, let's talk about how the pandemic has impacted the world. Certainly, remote work has really thrown a wrench into product work, mostly because, now I don't want to get too into this because this will take a whole hour to really talk about. We have learned a lot about how to help teams work when you're working remotely, when you have people working remotely. And it turns out for some kinds of work product teams do, it actually doesn't hurt, maybe even helps, depending on the team. But in other kinds of work they do, it really has impacted it in a bad way. And the difference is fundamentally discovery versus delivery. Delivery can work very well with remote workers. Discovery work is much harder because it requires, and this is where it really ties into the second part of your question, which is it's much harder to collaborate. It's much harder to collaborate because collaboration isn't just communication. There is a back and forth. The way a good product team, a cross-functional product team, product manager, product designer, engineers, supported by data science, supported by user research, the way those teams work and make decisions, that is much harder to do when you're not together for extended, periods of time. So it's not impossible, but what happens is when you work remote, a lot of bad habits sort of emerge or re-emerge, I should say, often. Now, one of the conclusions is you need a lot more coaching to handle this stuff, but you also need a lot more of these video-based calls. Slack, email is deadly for this. So we need to be more synchronous. We need to share more. We need to look at a prototype. But maybe let me just, because you could tell these are broad topics we could talk for a while. How good product teams make good questions. It is based on having competent team members. Mm-hmm. If you don't have a product manager that knows how to do their job, you're not going to make good decisions. How do you make sure you have a product manager that knows how to do their job? Their manager needs to be coaching them and responsible for that. Same if you don't have a designer that really knows design, service design, interaction design, visual design, user research, you will be missing one of the critical ingredients in these discussions. If you don't have at least one senior engineer that can contribute to discovery, you're going to lose almost any chance of innovation. So the most important ingredient is to have those competent team members. And the most significant driver for that are the managers doing the coaching they need to do. I'll kind of leave it at that because when we start getting into all the techniques, that would be a long discussion.
No, that was perfect, Marty. In fact, I think it's so important, right, that every role has to play in perfect harmony for the whole orchestra to come out perfectly, and the orchestra being the product in this case. One more thing, Marty, that I'd like to pick your brains on, and the more I talk to, especially in these times, right, everybody is getting a lot more, nervous in terms of how quickly can we see the return on the innovation angle. So the more I talk to CIOs and CXOs, and they're all looking at how IT investments can help them kind of make that giant leap in terms of transforming their industries. But they're also paying very close attention to how quickly can they get that return on investment, right? So what is your advice to product leaders in order to embrace this kind of extremely demanding situation?
Yeah, well, I would argue this has always been true. Product companies depend on innovation. It is true that in a company that's in trouble because their world has changed, now we have a much bigger sense of urgency. But one of the things you're seeing is if those companies if they hadn't developed those innovation muscles, they're not developing them now. Yeah. So those are the ones that are going bye-bye right now. And of course, the ones that had those muscles are taking advantage of this. So what you're really getting at is one of the biggest topics, which is transforming. What does it take to become a good product company? And it starts right where you were. Really starts with the CEO. But beyond that, and the reason I say it starts with the CEO is because the CEO needs to, the changes that are necessary will impact way beyond product. It impacts finance, it impacts HR, it impacts sales and marketing. And so without the CEO, you're in trouble. But you brought up IT.
Yeah.
Now, the fundamental change, and this is really important, I sit down with a lot of CEOs and talk about this, is they need to stop viewing IT as a cost center, and they need to start viewing it as a core enabler of their business. Mm-hmm. Big banks view IT as a cost center. Amazon views it as everything, right? It is the enabler of the business. And so this is often really the difference between a CIO and a CTO. In a product company, a CTO is running the technology organization. In a non-product company, a CIO is. Now, I know some CIOs that have made the transition beautifully, but a lot of them have not, because their mindset is all about what's the cost, what's the return. Now, the truth is, we care hugely about return, much more than an IT organization does. Because in a product organization, we care about outcomes. In an IT organization, they never talk about outcomes. It is all about output. It is all about serving stakeholders. So, but the real question is, how do you do that? And that's what it means to be a strong product organization. And I would argue it's what we talked about. It's the product leadership. That's what they need to put in place.
Yeah, absolutely, Marty. I can't agree more with you that the fundamental premise in which you think, right, IT being a core enabler of your business rather than just looking at output and not the outcome. I think that's so well put. And I think, most across all industries, everybody has embarked on this journey. And like you said, some of them are looking at it as cost. Some of them are looking at it as a perfect time to transform their entire way in which they work, right? Which again brings me to this question on product teams having a great deal of influence over whether businesses succeed or not, right? And if they're being able to very quickly capitalize on this change and quickly make that change. So how do you see organizations constantly experimenting and making sure they're able to kind of make sure that they're ahead of the curve and gain from that competitive edge, Marty?
Yeah, I just want to make sure I understood that question.
As product leaders, we always need to be constantly ahead of the curve, right? Constantly making sure that we understand the situation, the agility in which we have to work, but at the same time, being ahead of and coming forward with the kind of change in order to keep that competitive edge. So what would be your advice to product leaders here?
Okay, I think I understand now. Yeah, you're talking about like competitive position in your marketplace. Yeah, and of course, in a world where people can copy features in a day or two. It's what really distinguishes. So I've always been a believer, and I think this has been borne out by the companies out there. The only real competitive differentiator that can be sustained is your ability to serve your customers, your ability to innovate on behalf of your customers. Like Amazon likes to say, our customers can't tell us what to build, but our job as product teams is to innovate on their behalf.
Yeah.
Right. It's to really come up with great solutions for them. And one of the things that's true is that it's a moving target, because even if you have an awesome solution today, that doesn't mean there's not going to be better solutions tomorrow. So you really have to, every company I meet talks about how much they care about customers, but very few actually mean it or know what it means to do that. When I talked about the product vision being customer centric, it needs to talk, you really have to be constantly focused on what it takes to make your customers' lives better and dedicated to that. Any company can say that, but very few actually do that.
Yeah. Marty, you talked earlier on about team topologies, right? And of course, we didn't have time to go too much into the details, but particularly given that we have a lot of startups also listening into us today, what kind of team topology do you think a young startup would need to have? And maybe just also to just add to that question, also, how do you think startups can transform themselves from being really small to mid-size companies? What would be your recommendation to them?
Okay, well, sure. And this is sort of my sweet spot. I love working with startups and growth stage companies. That's basically what I do. Some of my partners work with the larger companies, but I love so first of all, let's see, in terms of topology is a super hard topic, except in startups. In startups, it's actually pretty easy because now an early stage startup, one of the things I love about it is the product team is the company. There's like one, maybe two product teams. It is not very hard to decide what each team should be responsible when you get, normally it's one product team up to between 10 and 15 engineers. Beyond that, okay, maybe you have two teams, maybe you have three, but it's easy. What gets hard is now you have 500 engineers. Now it's much harder to decide what's the right structure of your teams. So this is one of the few things that's actually much easier for a startup. And of course, one of the fun questions you ask is, what's the best way for a startup to become a growth stage company? And of course, the answer to that, the cynical answer is money. Some companies just get so much funding that they just hire like crazy, but they're not really ready to be a growth stage company. The more I think authentic answer is the best way to go from startup to growth stage is to achieve product market fit. Yeah. And that is our number one and really number 1, 2, 3 goal for every early stage startup is to achieve product market fit, because without that, nothing else matters. You can't really build a business. But once you get that, you are in growth stage if you have any level of product market fit. And then, of course, we have other challenges of scale. And so that's when companies have to put a lot of the leadership I was talking about into place.
Yeah.
There are certain things that are easier when you're a startup, and one is, we know what the vision is. We know who our customer is. We're dealing with this. In fact, the CEO is almost always the product person. There's no handoff there. That is super easy. There's a founder CEO, there's a designer, there's 10 engineers. That's our company. So these things are much easier, but it gets much harder as you grow. And then you have to really say, well, okay, what's the right topology? You have to say, what's the right architecture? You have to say, what's our longer term vision? What are we trying to do in 5 years?
Yeah.
Then we have to say, well, now that we've got all these customers that want so much from us, we need a real product strategy here. So that's when things get a little tougher.
Now, fascinating listening to you, Marty, and I can't believe how fast time has quickly run past. Thank you so much for these insights, and I'm already looking forward to hearing from you again soon. Thank you, Marty, and have a good day.
Thank you for inviting me. Good luck.
Yes.